This is Antithesis, your underground academic radio where the focus is on you. For those that are in the thick of it today, we know what you are living through. And for those that chose or were forced onto a different path, we know what it costs. We're here to be your companion and to help you reorient your compass a bit, to help make sense of it all. Thanks for being here. The opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect those of my employer or any entity professionally affiliated with me. Topics in these podcasts will be familiar to many, if not all, within the academic and scientific communities, within institutions, industries, and employers of all kinds. Some of these topics may be of a highly sensitive nature to certain listeners, particularly those that have experienced or are experiencing them, and could trigger some emotions that are upsetting or distressing. I've created this space to speak openly about these topics with the broader goal of helping individuals cope, adjust, and adapt constructively to the many challenges at hand. With that said, thank you for joining me. Antithesis, Episode 6, Uphill. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate having you here. With some big and immensely impactful news coming right after the release of last week's podcast, our episode number 5 entitled Trust, for those of you keeping track. I don't believe there's a single person of the folks that pay attention and have even the slightest desires and feelings about outcomes that hasn't been affected in one way or another by the latest news here in our country. And from here, where do we go? With the utmost of intensity of all that led us to where we are at this moment and potential for where it might all lead, whose hands are we in? Whose hands are you in? And where does any path lead? Is it ever a straight line? When is there not just one fork that lies ahead, but many? And how often do we find ourselves with a tree falling right on top of that path? And we're left to find whatever way we can to keep on moving to wherever we're needing to go, whether it's completely clear or not. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how complicated or sometimes simpler in parts that your path is, it is always uphill. We are all different. Even those people that are closest in their relationships, biologically and or socially. I used to think of it years ago as I pondered relationships and thought of my interactions with others initially as three-dimensional puzzles. Well, fast forward a lot of years, a lot of journeys, and meeting so many people, many kinds of people, all kinds of people. And even me personally seeing and experiencing such a large diorama with my sample size still being tiny. And I admit that for sure. But it became abundantly clear early on that we and our relationships are an infinitely complex puzzle with infinite dimensions. By the time I left the Midwest after completing my PhD and had the opportunity and privilege of doing my postdoc in the Bay Area, and yes, indeed, I knew back then what it might take and what I had to do to try to build something entirely new, completely different from what I had done in my graduate research, to expand more broadly and deeply in my experience in what might be 4, 5, or 6 years, if I could be supported for that long, as I dove headfirst into another immense and intense adventure, one that even I had no idea what the potential outcomes could be. At that stage of my life and career, and I'm betting that so many of you that have or are near completing your PhDs have also felt, it was the primary driver that made sense at the time. I needed to give science one more shot for my future. And I remember saying that to friends and family. I need to give science one more shot. We're going to try to pursue something even bigger, whatever that is. At this stage, and I mentioned in an earlier podcast about hypotheses essentially being like mini belief systems, so many of us have subscribed to that academic pathway and that chain of events, all for what can be vastly different reasons, to continue no less than what can feel like a blind pursuit to what in theory is to come at the end of that rainbow, a professorship. And today, I will not tout the statistics of the number of available faculty positions and the number of PhDs and other types of doctorate receiving individuals that are in hot pursuit of these rare, hallowed jewels. But I will say, for those of you listening that are employed and looking for new work or have been hunting for a new opportunity because you were relieved of your last job, these experiences are excruciating for anyone, for everyone, but especially for those of you that feel like you've been shut out. So, for all of you in pursuit of that first new faculty job or some other worthy position post-PhD or after your postdoc, hold your head high and Godspeed. For those of you non-academics that are grinding it out to get back to the workplace, and particularly those that have been toiling away for so long and have yet to find your match, my heart goes out to you all. The drive for and pursuit of validation and that constant grind that accompanies it, both the lifeblood and the poison, that almost feels like a parallel. What could seem like a stimulator and encourager suddenly becomes the addiction for what the successful individual must continue to pursue should they crave greater success and greater funding and greater accolades. Many people suffer from this, academia or not. But the fact that there is little, if any, other way to advance in your career in academia makes this vocation different. Not vastly different for any realm which is defined and operates by hierarchy, but let's state for the record how many grants, how many papers, how many awards. And one of my favorites that harkens back to faculty interviews that I participated in, and it really astounds me to this day still. How many students and postdocs and technicians do you have in your lab? How many do you plan to have? And for those of you non-academic listeners, yes, that question is basically revolving around how big is your research army? And for the most part, this is a big factor into how much research you can get done. Like you, as the principal investigator, as the advisor, the mentor, and all your folks that are working for you are supporting your science. And hence, we go all the way back to these earlier episodes of, are you open to what comes next? Or are you going to try to define what comes for your science? So that's always a part of that conversation. But then it also boils down to quality versus quantity, and especially right when you are starting out. But I'll never forget another faculty member with which I was interviewing at another institution that was also a very recent hire, telling me that they were going to fill up their lab right away with undergraduate researchers just so they have a lot of bodies in the lab. and like you heard a bit on my views on prizes in an earlier episode, yet again, another one of dozens of principles that you will need to define for yourself for how you want to operate, for what will work best for you if you're continuing the pursuit for employment in higher education, and particularly in running a research program. But I will say here for the record, you might make some decisions at first. You may stick with them, or you may change your mind and alter course. Alternatively, you could end up having tons of pressure from other faculty peers and pre-tenure committee members, and the list goes on and on. But mark my words, you can choose what you're being told for only that reason, because you're being told. Or you could advocate for yourself and proceed with what you feel is best. The drive for and pursuit of validation, that constant grind, many people suffer from this. Truthfully, every one of us suffers from this in one form or another, academia or not. But the fact that academia operates in the spheres of science and nature and logic and principles, but in and of itself is facilitated by humans, means there are cruelly subjective opinions and decisions that are made every day that can and will influence you. And folks, academic or not, people run these operations and they run these institutions top down. And I have to emphasize again, even from past discussions and earlier episodes, you do have to make the choices for what works with you. It's really important. And if you have mentorship and leadership and you're being instructed, there's only one right way, or it's the highway. That really does make it difficult. And that, again, is the type of reflection you have to make to say, what is my path? What is the place for me? And where do I belong? It becomes a very fine line and razor sharp line when you walk down that path and you realize you're not agreeing with what you're hearing. You're not getting the support internally for what you want to do, what you believe is right. So just keep that in mind. There are simply no fixed, hard and fast rules that apply the same to everyone. From the very top of this episode, so many of us approach infinity in our differences. We are not 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 dimensions. We are so many more. So be true to yourself and do all you can to communicate openly and effectively for what works and why, if it ever comes down to criticism or admonition. I only wish you would ensure safe and fair treatment for all of you, academic or not. But in the end, all we have is ourselves and that hill we're climbing together. I grew up in the Midwest, and all of my family loved sports and watched sports and participated in sports. And the time of me going on to school, and it was a large undergrad institution in the Midwest, participating with friends and, going to games. I used to love to fly the flag. But because my teams were not always the ones winning for the most part, for so many of my peers and compatriots, especially when I was an undergrad, it became more about the experience of being with each other particularly when it came down to a loss. Thinking back on it, trying to reflect as I moved into the sciences, started working in academia, became a graduate student, and moved along later as becoming a postdoctoral scholar, etc. I just did not have the emotional and psychological bandwidth to be able to sort of follow that excitement and, dare I say, tribalism to loving a team. Because the truth be told, you get to that point where there's only so much buffer you have when it comes to losses and disappointment. And it's not as if I wanted to separate myself from that. I know a lot of scientists, I knew faculty. I mean, people love sports. And maybe they need to just have a good balance as to how you feel when you're going to win or lose. But I knew for myself, I was just that type of personality is I can only handle so much difficulty and suffering, and I can't put that in the hands of any sports team. So you start thinking about that type of reflection of the type of person that you are. And for me, that was just how I handle these sorts of things. I raise this point now because when there's a loss and there was nothing that you could do on your own to control it, you just have to stop and look around you at the hill you're climbing and say, today just wasn't my day. And we have to be able to build and move forward. And continuing that sports analogy and parallel, where the team has that coach, that leader, that figurehead, but the responsibility still lies with each and every player as you look towards the goal, getting that win, getting that victory. But how do we think about how figureheads operate and what they're to mean to us? And they should be a source of inspiration. They should be a motivator to help drive us to make us better. But at the same time, it always falls on our laps as we walk that path on that uphill climb. The work doesn't stop. If the team wins, the team loses, there's still that next goal for the following week. And while it can be real challenging to have a loss, to have a failure, to have a setback, you have to keep your eyes on that prize moving forward. In the end, it's still about the long game. It's about that difference that you can make, that we can make. Everyone as individuals. That fits in with all of us. And it's really important to reflect upon. I can't remember a moment when I permitted myself to even coast in any way, anywhere I'd gone. It was just simply driving and pursuing and trying to grind it out all the time. I got to travel and meet so many people. I got to have such incredible experiences, the types of opportunities of a lifetime to see and do things that those opportunities afforded me. And it breaks my heart today to think, and even only recently, I tell these stories of how challenging that was and how painful this was. And I don't appreciate these institutions. And I only recently had stopped to truly look at a lot of photographs I've accumulated over all these decades, hundreds and hundreds of photographs and incredible memories during times that were so intense, so challenging, sometimes so painful, with failure and rejection and the lack of knowing the future, but can see myself in places and during times in these photos in which I managed to put myself and where I was at that point on the hill, where the view was beautiful, where the opportunities were growing, along with the challenges, but so was I. And with some of the best, funniest, most motivational people I could have ever hoped to be with. And it really makes me pause. I'm serious. I just bought some frames to put photos in. I mean, this is 2024, and we're talking decades of when this whole journey started. And I finally realized I need to start thinking of a new perspective of how I look at these challenges and what it was like and the moments that I got to savor. And now I am left with regret and wish that I could appreciate those moments back in time in a different way. But I think every one of us has to reflect on that. And I've just decided I need to appreciate and celebrate those moments today and try to think back on it and appreciate all the places I've traveled. And we didn't win every single one. We weren't successful at every single effort, but I need to pay homage to those opportunities and those chances to participate, to be able to appreciate the places that I was. I bet every one of you, academic or not, listening has had moments or maybe even years in your life that you know what I'm talking about. Graduate students, postdocs, faculty, for the whole gamut of you, if any of this strikes a chord. I just hope that if not today or tomorrow, if your benchtop, your laboratory, your classroom, your world, any or all are on fire today, that the moment the fuel feeding those flames are gone and you can hatch the phoenix from those ashes, that you can feel the good in what you've done and what you're doing. And this isn't just about the science, or the grants or the papers or the work product otherwise, but the example and support you are and what you give for other people. This past summer, finally taking an opportunity to do a little bit of reading, and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is one book focused on stoicism and being a stoic. It had been recommended to me ages ago, and I'd been given that book. It was time for me to finally just stop, sit, read, and reflect. It isn't just painful. I admit it's even a bit embarrassing right off the top to first comprehend and then accept. Once the grind starts, it becomes so difficult for me personally to just step back enough to breathe, to do something for myself without the raging noise in my head. I mean, I was able to do things and over the past many years pursue much of what I loved while I was doing my work because I tried to make what I loved as a part of my work, right? Is that familiar to everyone here? I'm sure it is. But even to have the peace of moment and mind to just read a simple book all the way through. But I can attest this applies for many scientists and the like, and especially to explain for non scientist listeners, because we end up eating, breathing, living technical documents, publications, and writing to no end. Alas, I admit it is how it is sometimes, and I confess that this is unfortunate and might not apply to all, but I'm confident that any scientist listening and nodding along here, you get the point. Anyway, as I finally took moments to myself this summer and read Aurelius's Meditations, so much of it simply aligned. The only word I need to say is it just aligned. Should have read this book so long ago, but it was just as fitting. I was able to take some time to finally understand the parallels and just get alignment. Here, I want to read one quote for you. I will include a couple minor edits to ensure inclusiveness for all, because yeah, I stand by that. That's how it is, and that's how it should be. You're not going to know what it is unless you really look it up or have memorized the quote, which you probably haven't. But anyway, here we go. Nature did not blend things so inextricably that you can't draw your own boundaries. Place your own well being in your own hands. It is quite possible to be a good human without anyone realizing it. Remember that. And this too, you don't need much to live happily. And just because you've abandoned your hopes of becoming a great thinker or you've abandoned your hopes of becoming a great scientist, don't give up on attaining freedom, achieving humility, serving others, obeying your higher authority, whether it be God, nature, or some other intrinsic or extrinsic essence. And I think just a reflection on that, and especially the quote of abandon your hopes of becoming a scientist, as I read that, I was like, wow, we're really focusing in the day, ancient times of thinking and science and what does that mean to people? And I thought to myself, well, I mean, even if that is no longer your vocation, I think we all owe ourselves that due justice of truth and thinking and being data driven and observation driven and not being in denial. I think that's so key. But it was just an interesting part of that quote. But nonetheless, how we build those boundaries and what we define as our happiness and our joy, but also to achieve humility and serve others. For every one of us, we are all on different points on that hill we are climbing. For you all on our uphill journey, remember, every single one of us is on that hill, each from a different starting point, each experiencing varying steepness and sureness as we move forward. And rarely is that trail tomorrow like it is today. For each of you, the satisfaction or even joy you get from this climb on your own, nothing could be more fantastic, and you should savor those views as much and as often as you can when you can. And the opportunities you take to help anyone along the full elevation you've reached, even if it means as little as taking account for where they are in the struggle of their climb. No matter how much they disagree with you or even thwart you, might hurt you. It is there where the opportunities lie for you to learn, continue to grow, and appreciate the good you have in your life. Folks, may we all grow and gain and thrive in this uphill climb. And with that, thanks so much for joining me today. And I hope you look forward to our next episode that will be released in a week's time. And no matter on which platform you heard today's episode, if you've enjoyed it and want to hear more, please subscribe, follow, like, and share. Set your notifications to let you know that the next fresh episode is ready for you to dig in. All of you, keep building up your courage. Hang in there and keep your head up. We'll talk to you again soon. Continuing 30 years of experience with stories in and beyond the academic realm, Antithesis is a podcast that will take these perspectives and philosophies and pull them, along with you, the student, the researcher, the innovator, the educator, into the sunlight. Join us for some firsthand experiences, insights from inside and outside academia, and perspectives that are aimed at redefining the conventions of academia and your training, with the aim of helping you reorient your compass and strengthen you on your journey forward, or to recover and grow from those times past. We'd love to have you follow us and tune in weekly. If you have a topic you'd like discussed or a challenge you are facing you want to share, email us at allsystemsgo@gmail.com. That is ALLSYST3MSGO@gmail.com.